Today on Inside the FLX, we're discussing how a digital platform is being used for good to educate and empower teens in Ontario and Seneca counties. This episode is brought to you by DeSanto Propane. They've been serving the clean energy needs of upstate New York homeowners, businesses, and home builders since 1937. With a reputation of reliability and dependability, DeSanto Propane is ready to serve you. Call 1-800-752-4574 or visit DeSantoPropane.com to learn more. And by the Fox family of dealerships located on Route 5 in Auburn. It's all there and all together at the Fox family of dealerships. Visit foxdealerships.com to learn more. Hi, I'm Josh Durso, and this is Inside the FLX. If you're listening to this podcast, you have probably heard of YouTube. In fact, there's a 50-50 shot you're watching or listening to the version that we upload to YouTube. It's a video platform for effectively everything imaginable. How-to videos, tailored programming for the internet, like this show, vlogs, which are a type of experiential video blog, and that's where the name came from, and so much more. Last week, we caught up with Kylie Allen. She works for an agency in Geneva known as the Family Hope Center. They've recently extended their operation beyond Ontario County and entered Seneca, a significantly more rural community. As we learned through our conversation, that comes with its own challenges. Kylie is a millennial, and since the agency's focus is providing services to teens and preteens, she knew something would need to change about how they did outreach. So, she took to YouTube. The girls the Hope Center was working with loved it, and the videos, posted weekly, provided a digital spark the agency was looking for. We pick up that conversation with Kylie discussing the process the Family Hope Center went through launching this new digital venture.
So Courageous Beauty is a girls group that's for ages 11 to 18-ish. I definitely go up on the upper end just because a lot of girls who have experienced trauma, their growth stops at a certain point and their mentality still fits within the age range I'm targeting. Point is, I'm trying to reach the younger girls before they end up in an unplanned pregnancy. And we talk a lot about self-worth. We talk a lot about healthy relationships. So the group itself, we meet every week, and I have a couple different locations that we meet at. One of them is at Family Hope Center in Geneva. We have a youth clubhouse in Geneva that we host one of our groups at, which actually some boys take part in too. And then we have a group at the South Seneca School in Ovid that just got started. We're really excited about that. And what we do in the group is we usually start with an activity or a game, something that helps break the ice, get the girls to know each other and be a little bit more comfortable with each other. And then I will bring up some sort of topic for the group either to discuss, or depending on the dynamics of the group, it might just be a lesson that I'm teaching and getting them engaged in. So like I said, we focus a lot on self-worth topics. Oftentimes in our Friday group, the one that meets at Family Hope Center, those girls have been with us for a long time, so they have started bringing their questions to group, and we talk a lot about friendships lately. They want to know, how do you talk to a friend when you feel like they're like suffocating you, and how do you have that conversation and things like that. So they bring those kinds of questions to group and we talk about it. My big thing is that I don't want to just be another teacher in their life. I want to give them a safe space to voice their opinions and their thoughts, because they actually do have really good thoughts, and just give them a safe space with some guided conversation points so that they can have a voice.
What was the need or the challenge that you guys saw that made you think this is the direction or this is the type of programming we want to build and give this outlet for these young people to sort of have the safe space?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we work in a pregnancy care center, so we meet all kinds of girls and women who are in extremely unhealthy relationships, who are making risky choices. And it seems when we ask them how it is that they came to be where they are, they just say we've never heard any different. This is what we've always known. And they have sex education in the schools, but the schools still aren't talking about the heart of the matter. Like they might talk about STDs, they might talk about pregnancy and some of the physical risks involved, but they always seem to leave out the emotional part and the bond part, which is essential in building relationships. So we just saw a huge need for girls, especially younger. We'd like to get them before they end up having made these bad choices and are then experiencing consequences. We want to get them before that point. And start teaching them how to understand what a healthy relationship looks like and what it means to be a healthy person themselves first, because how can they have a healthy relationship without being a healthy person first? So that's how we identified the need. And having this dynamic, it was kind of something that processed as we were doing it and found out, oh, they don't want to be lectured. They really don't. And the girls wouldn't come back to the group when we had it that way. So we found that when, we staged it more as a conversation, it was something the girls wanted to take part in. And we've had many girls say like I want to be here because I feel like these are my friends now. And this is a place where I'm not going to be judged for what I think. And it's like I can actually have a chance to form my own opinion about it.
Is it kind of like adding the humanity? Because when you're talking, you're giving that kind of description about it, it sounds like you're talking about adding the humanity into something that in schools is often taught in a very sort of
physical way,
a very matter-of-fact textbook, rather than being emotional relationship based. When you guys are working in that direction, is it sort of freeing to be able to, not in a sense free will, but to kind of be able to take it in the direction that the students actually want to see it taken, so that they're an active part of it?
It's amazing. So oftentimes the way group starts, I bring a topic and I ask them to solve the problem. So it's very cool to watch the girls try to answer the question, and they'll say something. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And so they'll tell me more, and I'm like, oh, all right, well, what about this? Did you think about how this might play into the puzzle? And then they'll like, oh, interesting. And then, certain things will come up in the conversation, and they'll bring something up very personal that they need to deal with in their lives. We actually recently had that happen in one of our groups, and we basically just stopped everything that happened and addressed to meet the needs of that particular girl in that moment. And all the girls, it's amazing to watch this. All the girls came up around her and were like, yes, we're here for you, and we're going to tell you the truth. You're beautiful, you're worth it. You don't have to listen to those lies and different things like that. So yeah, and it turns into a dynamic where the girls are mentoring each other. And that's exactly what I want to teach them to do.
Okay, so a couple different things that I want to jump off from that point.
Yeah.
One, I'm curious. It obviously you're focused on teens, but that's a pretty big age range in terms of the different life experiences that a person might have at 12 or 13 versus 18 years old.
Yeah.
How does that dynamic sort of play out in the group setting? I think that's probably one of the big areas of curiosity for folks who might be listening.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting because we do have a very wide range. We had a couple 11-year-olds that started out, and then we had two 17-year-olds who are now both 18. One of them is, both of them are 18 now.
Wow.
And what's cool is that, yes, sometimes the 11-year-old, 12-year-olds, they can be kind of distracting in the group and like want to do their own thing, but they're still listening.
Yeah.
They're still listening to the conversation. And what ends up happening is that the older girls kind of team up with the younger girls, and they engage them, like especially with the game time. So they kind of draw them in. And the conversation sometimes is different depending on do we have more of the older girls today, or do we have more of the younger girls? And we just adapt to whatever those girls need, but they work really well together, surprisingly.
Is there an element of like mentorship in the process that's sort of naturally happening behind the scenes, like as these people are getting together? They're humans. Is that kind of what's at play there? As everyone's learning, everyone is sort of looking out for each other, and especially the older to the younger?
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of the girls in our Friday group have been coming for like 2 years consistently every single week. So they know each other, and they've connected with each other outside of the group at this point. And like I said, that one day when the one girl was like expressing her needs, all the girls rallied around her. And I don't know if they all reached out to her directly after group, but I know that they do that. They will reach out to one another. Hey, how are you doing this week? Do we need to get together with a couple of the other girls and just get some time out so you can, like, especially if some of them are struggling with things like anxiety or depression and things like that. So I would say yes, I think that a mentorship is naturally coming out as the older girls are interacting with the younger girls. I hope that they see me as a mentor figure as well, and anyone else who would step into a leadership role in this program.
So I'm curious about the group dynamic and how you sort of overcome what I would assume would be some challenges that are associated with getting a bunch of people in that age range together and getting them talking about things that are very personal.
Yeah.
How, as instructors, how do you guys go about sort of facilitating a good space for a conversation to happen?
So the key there is activities and games. Because when we're talking about really important topics, things that are embarrassing, uncomfortable, they need to be able to laugh. So that's why it is so important for us to have games and activities. And sometimes the beginning of our group, sometimes I just gear the games to be something where they can get to know each other, or they can do something silly as a team and kind of figure out how to work together. But sometimes I choose a specific activity that teaches a lesson. And so that's how we'll introduce the topic. So a lot of times when we do have some of those intense conversations, sometimes they can be a little bit on the, what is the word, like, not political, but like hot topic. And so it can get a little heated sometimes in the conversation. You know, we just remind the girls you need to be respectful of one another. You can share your thoughts, but respect that someone else might think differently than you do. And if some of the girls aren't talking, that's okay. I give them some things to fidget with their hands. And more importantly, if they're at least listening in the conversation, I'm happy with the way that goes. So the easiest way to break that ice, to get them talking about something that's a little harder to talk about, is to use activities and games.
And is there a little bit of listening time that has to be spent anyway by maybe newer members of the group who come in and maybe the first couple times they're there, they're just kind of soaking things in rather than being an active participant?
Yes and no. It depends on who the girl is. If she's a little bit more extroverted, she typically just jumps right in because most of the girls invite her to do so. But we do have some new girls who were kind of just sitting in the background and watching as things were happening to kind of figure out what are the dynamics of this group. And I'll tell you too, each of the groups that I host are a little bit different in nature. So the one on the Friday group, which is the one that's been going for the longest, and those girls have the most deeply connected relationships, and they're really, really good about inviting other girls in. That group is very different than the way the one at the youth clubhouse works. So that one is more, there are boys involved with that one. And like, that's a whole different ballgame, just so you know. Girls are way different than boys. So that group, it's a little bit less of a safe space to talk. It's more, I'm there to engage them in a teaching lesson. So I bring something and I'll ask them to engage in it, but I'm more of a teacher in that role. At the South Seneca School, which is still fairly new, I'm finding a very similar dynamic to what we have in the Friday group. So I'm hoping to create some of the similar atmosphere. And as the newer girls, because all of them are new, we're creating what we want that to be. So the girls are very open. We're just getting to know each other right now, and we'll progress from there to see how they do with some of these heavier topics. I won't throw them at them all at once.
How did you find your way into this space and into this line of work?
Oh, it's a great question. I could tell you the whole story, but I think I'll shorten it just to this part, because I've been with Family Hope Center since 2015, so that's going on 4 years. And I started out as a volunteer, didn't really understand what the heart of it was, but as I was working there and getting to know our clients and building relationship with them, I realized how at the core family is in like our values. And when we were doing the pregnancy test, like, it just broke my heart when I saw how many of these girls were experiencing the consequences of their choices. And the problem was that they had no idea that they were bad choices. And I've always had a heart to mentor girls. So it was actually my director who suggested that I do something with the younger girls. And when she suggested it, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm taking that and running. And so I totally did. And that's how the group came out. And that's my purpose. It's just my heart to want to be mentoring girls, young girls, especially.
So obviously one of the big reasons why you're here is because we're here to talk about technology and we're here to talk about digital.
Yeah.
So walk us through what it is that you're leading on that side, on that digital side, to engage these young people in maybe a little bit of a different way.
That's
than what they're used to.
Yeah, so it's still fairly new to me, but one of the big things that we figured out is, like, we can get girls to come through the door, but most of the girls that we want to reach probably won't come through our door unless they're here for a pregnancy test. And the only way we can reach them is online. So recognizing that, like we have our social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, all that fun stuff, but I wanted a better way to engage with them. So what we did is we created a YouTube channel. And the first video that we made, we actually went to the high school in Geneva and we asked the kids to ask us questions about self-worth and healthy relationships. We got like over 100 great questions about healthy relationships and self-worth. And so then we just went on making these videos to answer those questions, and we post them on YouTube. So we're actually continuing to do that. And I'm still very new at it. So if you do go check it out, just give me lots of grace. And the cool thing is that we are getting some interaction. And what we did is created an anonymous question form online, and we link it to every YouTube video. We link it to all of our social media platforms. So girls can ask questions, submit questions, and we will answer them either on YouTube or any other media that we choose to use.
So obviously, social media tends to be a little divisive at times.
Yeah.
Does this allow you guys to sort of also have those teachable moments and that dialogue about what healthy interactions look like on social media, versus what some of the unhealthy ones might look like?
Absolutely. I think it gives us a really good platform because I have never seen any other centers doing this. Like, they have always wanted the clients to come to them, which is great. It's honestly, that's where the most change is going to happen because that's where relationship is so important. However, we're not getting that information out online, which is where all of the clients are. So yeah, I think it's huge and important to get our voice out there. So we're sharing those kinds of things. So absolutely, our videos, one of the questions that we got and we answered is about what does an abusive relationship look like? Like, how do I know if my boyfriend is being abusive? So then we talked online about what's the difference between abuse and just an unhealthy relationship. Because like control is really where that comes into play. So it's really interesting, and it's important that we get that out online and offer it for free.
Is that, I have to ask, is one of the younger guests that I've had on this show, is that the gap, or does that tend to be the issue that you see when you look around the region and you look in some of these more rural communities and you see different agencies and different service providers? They're doing all these great things, but they're not online. They're not digitizing what they're doing. Is that the big gap? And I guess the question, from your own experience, what's been the biggest sort of, I don't want to say success story, but the light bulb moment where you're like, oh my God, this is working. And this is exactly why we're doing this.
Yeah. So the first question, do I feel like the lack of online presence is the big gap? I don't think it's the only gap. I do think it's probably one of the bigger ones for being able to connect with this generation. One of the things we have found with this generation, and when I say this generation, I'm referencing Generation Z, which is the generation right underneath me. We're finding that even though they do like to have all this information online, especially when it comes to these kinds of personal topics, they still want to talk to someone. They still want to have a personal contact. So yes, it's good to have this information online, but it's not fully closing the gap. We want to be able to reach them online, but we still want to get them to come and have a personal relationship with us. Part two of the question, can you remind me?
What are some of
the aha moment?
Yeah, like what was that moment like? You know, not just maybe what it was, but what was that like for you when it clicked and you were like, oh my God, this is working?
Yeah. Well, I can remember the moment. It was when we had like 6 questions in our anonymous question form, and I was like, they're watching our stuff.
Yeah.
They're asking us questions. And it was really cool to watch because I have no idea who's submitting these questions, but they're kind of all themed along the same line. So I wonder, is it the same couple people who are submitting the questions? We answer it on YouTube and they ask a follow-up question. Like, they're following our content. And that's like, that's exciting. I about probably squealed and jumped around the room a little bit.
So to that end, obviously the goal, like you said, is for personal relationship and to have that real dialogue. But at the same time, isn't what you guys doing kind of proof that there is a need for that a dialogue of some kind to also be happening online in those
Yeah.
places where a lot of bad interactions can happen
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I wish that more of the agencies, especially the not-for-profit agencies, would get on that bandwagon. Yeah, jump online. It's hard because we don't have enough staff, but it's important. It is very important, and we do need to be joining that conversation. That's how we're going to reach them.
Yeah. Now, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I am curious. The things you have seen historically in Geneva versus the things you are seeing now in Seneca County, with sort of different makeup, different communities, one very rural, a little more urban. What are some of the differences that you guys have seen along the way between the two?
Yeah, I think I still need more time to see some of those differences, but definitely the piece of like Geneva is a city, and there's extreme diversity in race and color and everything, and there's a lot of acceptance because of that. There is also a lot of bullying because of that. And in the rural community, there's not as much diversity, and there's a lot of poverty. I think there's a lot of poverty in both ways, but Geneva has more access to resources than Seneca County does, which is why this is why we needed to open a satellite center in Seneca County, because they're having a hard time getting to the resources. So I think that's the biggest difference. It's just a need that I see Seneca County is lacking.
And transportation. Every time we have one of these
Yes.
conversations, transportation in Seneca County,
Yes.
and in similar counties is always the big issue.
Exactly, which is why it was so important for us to be nearby the school.
So I wanted to piggyback off of that a little bit, and you mentioned bullying and that part of it. How much of the conversations that you guys have or that you guys see sort of blossom out from the bullying, whether it's digital, cyber, or just in real life? How often is that a starting point for conversations and group dialogue?
To be honest, I don't know that it always comes up as the starting point, but certainly it comes up pretty much every conversation we have. And I don't know that they would always call it bullying, but it's more like pressure. It's social pressure in general, but just like, I have this opinion and people are going to judge me, people are going to make fun of me. I have to have the exact right position, I have to have the exact right thoughts, I have to have the exact right appearance, like all those different things. So it ties in, because every conversation we have, they're always worried about what the other kids are going to be thinking. And it may not be kids, it may just be society in general that they're afraid of. But online bullying is a thing, through text, through a lot of the other social media apps that they have, like when they're messaging each other personally. It's scary, the stuff that's happening online there, and in school. So it comes up a lot, but not often as the starting point.
Okay, so I can almost guarantee that after this podcast goes up, I will get about a dozen emails from various listeners, but I will say our older listeners, who say they will bring up peer pressure. Is that, my personal viewpoint has been that it seems a little overplayed now, that peer pressure isn't what it was 20 or 30 years ago. And I can even think back to my days in high school. It just wasn't what it was made out to be, or what some people thought it was, especially when you go back to the 90s and 80s. Is peer pressure, because you mentioned pressure, and I want to give you the chance to sort of expound on that a little bit, in terms of, because some folks might just automatically assume that you're referring to a peer pressure in sort of the traditional, you need to go try this, or something like that, as opposed to the pressure of just having every ounce of your life on the internet, practically.
Judged, like out for the world to see. I know that is still an issue, that peer pressure is definitely still a thing, because kids are like, and I don't know that they directly say you should do this, but there is like just an expectation that everybody has a boyfriend in high school, everybody has sex before they get out of high school, and it's not true, but the kids assume that it is. They're assuming everybody's doing these things. So peer pressure, I don't know that it always takes the form of, come on, do it, as much as it takes on the form of, these are the social expectations and you're weird if you don't fit within that context. Does that make sense? So in that sense, that pressure is extremely present. The other one, I'm not sure how prevalent it is. I haven't heard a lot of my girls talking about that. I think most of them kind of isolate themselves anyway, because the kind of girls that we tend to get are the ones who don't have a lot of friends at school. So they kind of keep distant, and I don't think that peer pressure is something that affects them as highly as some others might, like those who are already in groups of people and just want to stay within that group. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting because like in real time, I'm thinking of the feedback that I can inevitably see people sending after they listen to this
funny.
conversation. And the next one is, well, and I just want you to sort of respond to this idea because I'm sure you hear it all the time. Well, you have young people buried in their smartphones, buried in their computers, and they're in this digital space and they're not having real human interaction. So they need to put all the digital stuff down and they need to go play outside or do something.
Yeah.
And how do you, when you're talking to not just, forget students, when you're just talking to members of the community, when you're trying to talk to them about this problem, this issue, how do you debunk that and let them understand that, it's an ebb and flow. It isn't like this exclusive, everyone is buried in their smartphone, so this is the problem we have now.
I've never been posed that question before. That's really interesting. How would we go about convincing the community that it's not the way they're seeing it?
Yeah.
That is an interesting question. Because on the one hand, yes, there are definitely more engagements on devices than there ever used to be. But I can tell you that when we sit down in group, almost all the girls put their phones away and they don't touch them while we're in group. And they're respectful about that. And maybe that's because that's what their parents taught them to do. Not sure. But the other interesting thing is anytime that, and we have brought this topic up in our girls groups before, we'll ask them, what do you think the role of social media and the role of technology has in your life? Do you find it to be a detriment? Do you find it to be a help? And when we had that conversation, it was fascinating because the girls were like, yeah, I totally see where it gets out of hand sometimes. And I watch myself go there and like they'll start correcting their course when they feel it. And they definitely recognize like how social media can get out of hand and they're like, all right, I just need to take a break from this. Or, oh, okay, I'm pushing this too far. I'm putting too much online. And so they recognize it. But I think it's important that we do have those conversations and we need to ask them because if they're not being asked, they're not going to think about it. So they do recognize it. The girls do recognize it. And they also see it as a help because at school, if there aren't many people who are a good influence, they find supportive people online. And that has been something that has helped them through a lot of hard times in their life. So I don't think it's accurate to say that they're always on their phones.
And does that sort of suggest that perhaps young people aren't being given quite enough credit for how they've grown up in this digital world? They probably are some of the most savvy people on these platforms and aware of what's going on around them. But like you said, it might get difficult sometimes because you just get sort of sucked into these dynamics and these situations that aren't always healthy. But do you think maybe young people aren't given quite enough room or space to basically be in that area where they're comfortable? They are, they're okay there.
But maybe I could see that. I mean, as the generations develop, I think each generation assumes the generation after it should just take on, all the things that was in their generation. And we have to be understanding that the next generation had different dynamics and different understandings and different things that they had to learn. And it's not wrong, it's different. And I think that's true of every generation after, but I think the younger generation needs to be more understanding of the generation after them also, and be understanding that this is the context that generation grew up in, and they have no understanding of this world that you're in. So be respectful. Be respectful and be respectful. You understand?
That's exactly how it works. And where can folks either see the content that you guys are creating or just learn more about the program?
Yeah, well, you can definitely go online. Our website is courageousbeauty.org/home. You can also check out our content, and like I said, be gracious to me because a lot of this is still very new. But the YouTube is Courageous Beauty Studios, and you can look that up online.
All right. Appreciate the time, Kylie. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Josh.
Hey, that's all the time we have for today. I'm Josh Durso, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Inside the FLX. If you did enjoy it, consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. If you subscribe, you'll never miss a future episode and will know exactly when we upload. Like everything else on our platform, though, this show is free to listen and watch. That said, it does cost money to produce, so if you enjoy it, appreciate being informed about everything going on in the Finger Lakes, head over to our brand new Patreon account and become a subscriber. You can pledge any amount to contribute monthly, and any amount goes great lengths to helping us produce the show. We thank you in advance for your patronage. Visit www.patreon.com/FL1 to learn more. I'll see you back here next week, and in the meantime, listen to past episodes by visiting www.insidetheflx.com.